Todd.
Yeah. Hey,
This is the first time on the podcast that I've ever had anybody back to back, and I have a feeling that we could probably do a back to back to back to back. So this is part two, a continuation of the original podcast that we had together, because we went deep into your perspective on history and stuff like that. But I think it's important for us to understand that today, as we sit and stand here, there's rapid progression.
The situation is fluid. I mean, it's and there's more heartbreaking and terrifying and horrifying news that comes out every day. And over the weekend, if it seemed like we were back in 1930s Europe again, with what happened in Russia at the airport, in Dagestan, and everywhere I turn, it's just heartbreaking, more heartbreaking. I mean, they found a baby in an oven, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and then right away, the gaslighting propaganda machine said, no, that's not true. Right? None of it is true. This entire fucking thing's been fabricated. Right. None of it is true. Here's the narrative I've heard. This is all fabricated by the Mossad, just like 9/11. So Israel can go in and grab land back.
Sure.
Gaslighting edits.
Everything that happens in the world is the Jews' fault. Especially when it happens to the Jews. I mean, you're never allowed to blame the victim unless it's a Jewish victim. Because Jews don't count. I don't know if you ever read that book, by the way, by David Baddiel. I don't like to, I'm not here to hawk other people's stuff, but it's a fantastic, easy read.
What's it called?
It's called Jews Don't Count.
Okay, so I listened to a lot of books.
He's a comedian. He's a British Jewish comedian, and he wrote this book, and it's sort of light, but at the same time tackles, the crux of the problem, which is, A, Jews have no safe zone because we're attacked from the left and the right equally. It's a giant circle of hate. And B,
what do you say to people that call us constant, perpetual victims?
I'm not sure how to. It depends on the conversation, and it depends how.
Well, I've heard people say stuff like, "Okay, we heard you had a Holocaust. A lot of people were killed. Stop making movies about it and talking about it." And it was 80 years ago.
Well, that's part of the work I do at the memorial. I work as a docent at the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach. And
how do I register a tour? Because I wanna come down.
Yeah, you can bring a group of people and you can register, and we'll do a specific tour where you'll have a Holocaust survivor, and me or someone like me giving you a guided tour.
All right, I definitely want to do that. I will take that offline, and I really want to set that up. I know you glanced over last time.
It's important work though, because I have these conversations all the time. I mean, there are people and classes, and they're studying the Holocaust for the first time in a lot of cases. They don't really believe, and children, by the way, aren't able to fathom. Even adults aren't able to fathom what 6 million is. They have a book there, which all it is the word Jew repeated 6 million times. And the book is like this, and it's it's not like a small book, it's a big volume, is the thickness of an encyclopedia volume. That's, it gives you some feel for just what a number that is. People get all bent out of shape at,
It's just a number, man. To other people,
it's just a number. But they don't really understand what the scope is of that number.
Right. And
those are just the people who were killed. Right. I mean, that doesn't count all the people who survived, and there weren't many of them, but there were over 1 million, and that's why I'm here. And the mental trauma and the generational trauma that has inflicted on everyone, including descendants, it's a shockwave through the genealogy, and this isn't the first time. That's the thing. There's a cycle, and it's repeated over time, and during Passover we all talk about the story of how they came for us during X, Y, and Z. They came for us again. And it's more of a preparation than anything.
Is that what you think we're encountering now?
I mean, history it tends to repeat itself. I mean, and we're always the piñata.
Why?
For society. Why? Because we're the easiest. We're the smallest group. We are the minority. That's the easiest answer. You know, who do bullies pick on? Usually the littlest person. Why? Because they can't do anything about it. You know, people blame. It's funny. You read that book I recommended, Jews Don't Count. That people think we control the media. But if we could control the media, don't you think we would have done a better job?
Yeah, that's just getting ahead of the narrative. That way, whatever we say is discounted.
Right. I mean, people think we can control everything. You know, we control
the Jewish
whole
banking
world,
conspiracy.
politics, the banking. But if we did, don't you think that, you know, this kind of stuff wouldn't happen repeatedly?
I want you to flip that one on the right, and you'll be more comfortable. You've got it backwards.
I do.
Yeah. No. Like this. It's down. There you go. That way, it's going to hurt your ear.
Thank
Perfect.
you. Oh, my God, is that amazing?
So that's not the first time that's happened. So I didn't realize it until now.
I didn't.
So that's a great point. Is because we're the minority, we own and run everything based on the anti-Semitic bias that is fabricated and absolute bullshit. But I think there is.
Oh, there's way more reasons than that. That's the easy reason.
Sure, but the reason that correlation is easy to be made is because even though we as a Jewish community have still not reached the number of pre-Holocaust number of Jews in the world. It was 16.1 million in the world pre-Holocaust, 80 years ago, and right now we're at like 15 and change. So we haven't even been able to replace, replicate, and grow at the same clip. But with such a small slither, with the things that you can actually document throughout history, look at the contribution that the Jewish society has added to all of humanity.
So there's some jealousy. And
there's a lot of jealousy.
Jealousy certainly plays a huge role. And we can go into what Israel, just in the short history, forget about Jews. Let's just look at what Israel brings to the world and what it has brought to the world since 1948. Certainly less than a century. And let's look at what the entire surrounding Arab world has brought.
Here's what I really want to do. I think the reason we have a part two is that you are an incredibly well-spoken, bright individual who's passionate about this topic. So if there is something in particular that you want to come out and resonate and as a message to people on this podcast, I want it to go in that direction. And I'm hesitant to lead because...
So I have a few things I want to say. Okay. The first thing I want to say, and I want to make sure I get to this, is the metaphor that I'm using. You know, a lot of people talk about proportional response and all this stuff. And in war, you don't have a referee keeping score and whatnot. Proportion is ridiculous. But let's look at it a different way. Okay, why is it so important that Israel goes in surgically and roots out the evil that is Hamas or the terrorist affiliates and those sympathizing with them and enabling them? And really the answer is tricky, but the way I like to look at it is that these terrorists are a cancer, okay? And the reason that doctors, when we have a patient afflicted with a horrible type of cancer that's inoperable, what they need to do is they need to inject poison into the patient. Okay, they do that, it's called chemo. They literally poison the patient with the hope that the poison will kill and eradicate the growth of the cancer before it kills the patient. Right. And in a lot of cases it does, and it's proven that it is effective, even though it takes a horrible, horrible toll on the patient and the patient's family and supporters, and they will never be the same as a result, usually, if they do survive the cancer of the treatment. The treatment is horrible. And that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, there are innocent Palestinians
no doubt,
who do not deserve to live their life, under a horrible, non-human regime that does not value their lives, that doesn't want better for them. All they want is bloodshed, and they want not only Israel and all the Jews dead, but once that mission is finished, they want all of Western society. and they are strategically moving in that direction. And it is a caliphate, and they are, the Jews are always first. The Jews were first with the Nazis, but that wasn't their goal. Their goal wasn't just to eradicate the Jews. Their goal was world domination. The Jews were the first there, and so it is throughout history. The Jews are always first because they're the easiest. But that's never the end goal.
I think you hit something there that I believe strategically and militarily. I've kind of heard it. I've read it said I've read it in different ways, but the way I see it is, I think Israel is actually going in there to protect the Gazans that are sick and tired of Hamas, and give them an opportunity to speak publicly, to rise up against Hamas publicly, rise up against the dictatorship that they've been living in, where the Hamas leadership is billionaires and nobody questions, like, where are they getting all this money from? They don't have any businesses. They're not publicly traded on any stock exchange. It's a pay-to-slay business, and they're siphoning off a good bulk of that money. It's open and people understand it. I think militarily, strategically, Israel is going in there to be able to separate the ones that are pure innocents, that see how their brethren, and I'm talking about Muslim Israelis living in Israel, how they live. And they must aspire for the same version of that life. A mother is a mother is a mother, right? You might be indoctrinated, you might have hate in your veins, but eventually you are a mother of that child and would ultimately like to see that child aspires and lives a better life. Now, with that being said, we mourn life, they celebrate death. There's a big difference between the two.
There's a huge cultural rift, and there's also as we talked about last time, there's indoctrinated hate from the cradle.
Right.
That is nonstop. It's an echo chamber in their minds. It is a cult. They, as soon as they're born, they are now in a cult of hate.
Right.
And they hate Israel and Jews the most, but all Western society, America, they're taught similar hate. They're just not, they're not as close. So, America's across this vast ocean and the sea and everywhere else. So while they see the infiltration of the culture, they don't feel it like they do right across a fence from the Israeli army.
Oh, the United States is also quite formidable.
Yeah, but I think the hate is still there. I just think if you see something every day and you're told to hate it, it's a lot easier than if you see it on TV. Okay. So back to the cancer and rooting that out. The most important thing to keep in mind, because it's going to take a toll on Palestine. It already is. Every time there's a war, it takes a toll, and there will be destruction, and we will go in there with a fine-tooth comb and root out all of the terrorists.
I think they're banking on it because it emboldens the people that have lost lives, right? And now rallies more people for them. Look what's happening worldwide.
Well, the most important thing to keep in mind is that cancer, as horrible as it is, and it rips people from the inside out and destroys them and their families that watch them wither away, is not contagious, okay? But terrorism and this hate is contagious. Make no mistake that it's from the inside, it's destroying Palestine, but it does move from person to person. It does move from society to society. It does move throughout the Arab world. These terrorists are not the only terrorists that have this same hate for Israel and the Jews and the Western culture. It's throughout Islam. I don't know what it is. I don't know why Islam is susceptible to this in its radical form as much as it is, and why there are so many different branches that manifest in this way. But I can tell you that Hamas is not the only one, and it's not the strongest one either, by number of people and, army that they have, number of weapons that they have. The masterminds behind it similarly are usually Iran and some other very, very, very wealthy families within the Islamic world, all built from oil money. The more and more I think about it, I think there might be a way it's going to cause mass hysteria and an economic collapse probably in the Western world and the entire world. But part of me thinks that it might be time to just destroy the oil wells and refining capabilities throughout the Middle East.
Wow.
I think it's the root of a lot of this. We've given, for whatever reason, these people have this fountain of money and they use it for evil purposes. They don't use it for their citizens. They don't use it to build infrastructure. They don't use it. And this is not just in Palestine. This is all over the Middle East. They use it for nefarious purposes, by and large. And I don't know if that was the sort of, I don't know what else they bring, like what else in the Middle East are they contributing to society except oil and oil-derived products? I want to know where we are in a global world right now with a global economy. You know, since airplanes sort of became the norm of travel and since the internet came to be, our world is like connected at every node and point all throughout the world. We have global commerce. We have nations doing business with each other, normalized relations with Israel and a number of countries in the Middle East. But normalized for what? Like what is being traded? Is it just the oil?
Well, everybody can point to what is pretty out in the open, that this attack they've been training it for years, but has been expedited because of the normalized relations with Saudi Arabia, which would have then isolated Iran and would have created kind of this moat around Israel, because Saudi Arabia is, the crown jewel of the Middle East, if you will. And it also is afraid of Iran and its tendencies and militarily and stuff like that. But Saudi Arabia isn't doing this because they've all of a sudden, turned a new leaf and a new chapter and decided. It's because they are a bright, aspiring, super wealthy country that recognizes that its own natural resource, it will never be eliminated. It will be in a massive decline. And the next way to profit and create wealth will be vis-a-vis intellectual capital. So where do you have the largest abundance of intellectual capital? Israel. More companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country outside the United States. And they have the money and the resource to throw around at all of these startups and tech companies and AI companies that are going to do some incredible things into the future. And where do you get that? Are you going to get that from Iran? Are you going to get that from Lebanon or Syria?
No.
Israel. So that's what's happening.
I get it.
And the rest of the world, they didn't do this because so you talked about that resource. Well, that's the next thing that they're going to start exporting. And they have a lot of money.
And I think that they're right. And I think they're right to see the future. My question, though, still stands. What do they have to offer in exchange? I mean, yes, they are huge exporters of things like palm oil and dates. And, they do have agriculture, olives, for instance, and things like that. But, my question is, there are 10 million people in Israel, or, somewhere about that. And there are, 1.8 billion people in the surrounding Arab world. So what, other than oil, is going to really be exchanged on those levels?
Money.
Okay, some money.
Money. That's a beautiful part about money. It's scalable. It could be put in major different things, but you need to know how to put it into the right things.
Would I rather them spend money trading with Israel than
we can go down the rabbit hole that I don't know if either one of us can speak to it at all. But I mean, war in of itself is a business. Weaponry is a business.
Sure.
You keep people fighting. You generate new things. You sell new products. Like, you understand? It's something that we can't put away.
It's definitely not my forte, but I think there's a huge discrepancy there. And so back to my original, the oil situation is basically a fountain of evil. They struck oil in the Middle East. It's where it's most prevalent or easily, harvested in our world, for better or for worse. And, it's this area where it's always been like sort of the meeting place of 4 different continents, and how it's all come together, or 3 different continents, and then, foreign interests like the United States who come in and sort of exert influence there too. And it has been even before they discovered oil there. This is where armies would get from Africa to Asia, or to Europe from Asia, or to Asia from Europe. I mean, this is the stomping grounds where it all comes together. If you're playing a giant game of Risk, this area is just impossible to keep as someone who plays it strategically, because it's just constantly being attacked from every different front. So it's a very, very, very volatile, difficult to defend area that's always been in the middle of, if not the aggressors of, every war.
Right.
And
so the export terrorism, I mean, people talk about the occupation and all these bullshit terms that don't make sense. And here's the craziest one that nobody says anything about is Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, an Iranian-backed terrorist organization, occupies Lebanon.
in entirety.
Nobody says a word. Nobody says a fucking word.
Right.
Lebanon.
And they destroyed the crown jewel of the Middle. I mean, It was a beautiful country.
I know.
Beirut was the Paris of the Middle East, and the culture. It was a predominantly Christian culture, and it is no longer.
Right. So you could see that those impacts, but I wanted to ask you something that you would be able to speak to better than I would, because I didn't go to school in the United States. Is where did you go to university? Duke. Okay. Wow. Okay. Growing up, my favorite basketball team because of Christian Laettner. Just putting that out there. And I love the logo, so I have a lot of Duke gear. And I didn't know anything about it because my brother liked it. You're seeing what's happening in universities and MSAs, the Muslim Student Association.
Devastating to me.
Who do you think is funding them? Or, just talk to me about how it got so bad.
I think that there's a number of things that have been festering for some time. I think that, we can point to the time during COVID as where, things fully swayed, but I think it's been in the works a lot before that. I think that.
What do you mean it? What are you referring to?
So I think it is sort of a disconnect between what colleges should be, in terms of sort of creating citizens of tomorrow, from youth, from high school level youth, and creating people who could be, well-spoken people who are learning in an academic atmosphere, who are able to have discourse on lots of different subjects and come together on a campus, learn from great professors and traveling professors, and have a speaker series and an art series. And, these campuses are a great place for people to finally get out of their homes and have their eyes open to a greater world, be exposed to people from all over the country and all over the world together, be exposed to various professors and lines of thought, and be able to openly dialogue and have discourse about those things. And, that's what a university was created to do. And somewhere along the lines, and I don't think it was that recent, but somewhere along the lines, the disconnect between how those discussions were moderated and what passes for non-threatening open discourse has been thrown off track. And I think part of it is because our university system has become so liberal. It's always joked that, young people in America and probably all over the world, tend to lean left. And once they sort of live a little bit of a life, they tend to lean right. And there's a lot of different sayings and metaphors that have been thrown in there to talk about that. But, it's expected that younger people will be more tolerant and more accepting of other cultures. And so campuses have become very liberal over the years for whatever reason. I mean, that's part of it. But I think that also the dynamic of allowing conservative voice on campus has been drowned out, and it's been allowed to happen. And it's very difficult to have an honest discourse on anything, whether it's finances, politics, or religion, or anything in between, if you don't have a discourse that allows left views along with right views. And I don't mean right correct, I mean right. Conservative. And so the left has come, and I don't think it's a recent phenomenon, but I don't think it's distant. I think it's somewhere maybe in the 90s or early aughts, where liberalism has come to be the accepted, if not preferred, language of student bodies on campus and of the people who teach them and of the people who are the deans and administrators of the schools. And conservative voices have been drowned out, have been bottled up, contained, not allowed to participate. And what this has done is allowed a very, very liberal group of kids to run the roost. And, a lot of it, they had this thing where it's like economics and, diversification needs or whatever. I don't know what the right word is, but like mandates for college campuses that they needed to have this diversity and inclusion and
but when did becoming left or liberal become hate? Like, you are seeing marches where they are saying we want all of it, we jihad now,
so
like you're saying, like, they're not like, there's not even a veiled anti-Semitism. It is out and out like war.
So I think in this
And what place on earth
inclusion and
tolerates
diversity mandate that has echoed throughout, and with every single movement that's occurred, especially in the United States, but also in other continents and countries as well, I think that groups like women, groups like the alphabet, gay, lesbian,
LGBT.
sure. I think groups like Native Americans, I think groups like the blacks, I think groups like the Pan-Asians, they've all come to have a voice under this now resonant liberal diversification and inclusion mandate, and it's worked. They've rocked the institution of higher learning, but also the institution of Western society, and made it sort of understandable that what was done to their cultures, appropriation, colonization, slavery, everything else that was done, in world creation centuries ago was not okay, and that it has its effects today, and that they want to be not only be apologized to, but they want a world where they have a voice now. They don't want
some of these are valid concerns,
I have no problem with.
I don't understand how it crossed paths. Like the LGBT community has no inclusion.
It's transsectional, I guess, is the way is
right. The Black Lives Matter movement, how does it coincide with this? Like,
so they all banded together because they all were different minorities, and they found that in strength, in numbers comes strength, which they're right. So if they can lend a voice to each other's causes and join together, they become even more dynamic and more powerful.
But what if
the problem is, as is often the case, someone always gets left out, and that someone happens to be the Jewish people. Okay? Jewish people, we're like chameleons by necessity, okay? When we have to, we can blend in and become white, okay? When my mother, who was born in a refugee camp, I talked about it last time, when she came over she wasn't even allowed in the United States because our border was closed, so they moved to Canada first, and she grew up there. But in the same vein, in North America, as someone who was coming in with immigrant parents, my mother was embarrassed that her parents didn't speak English, couldn't learn English as well as she could, that had accents after they had learned English. She wanted to be more like America. And Jews in general, they want to do that. They want to blend in with the society that will actually accept them there. That's what we do. Okay, you know why we do that? For self-preservation.
Sure.
It's just a natural defense over centuries and millennia of being oppressed and tortured, and made the victim of various horrible purges and otherwise. But that's what we do. Okay, and so it's very easy to see how these minority groups, when they band together, will view Jews as part of the oppressing group,
Right.
part of the historically white colonizing groups. And yet that's not what Jews are. Jews are every color, okay, literally under the rainbow. Predominantly in Israel, most Jews are Semitic, and they have brown skin. We have, obviously, the Falasha Jews from Ethiopia who are black skin. But Jews we're a full rainbow of colors. We're our own race.
And even sexual orientation.
Correct.
Like the LGBT community is alive, well, and kicking and thriving.
I think that's true of all cultures. I think that in some
I agree,
they
but
oppress
not,
that.
but not in Islam.
Right. Well,
They've openly said that this sort of, I think they called it a disease, doesn't occur.
Right.
Or we don't have such a thing, right?
so the hypocrisy that these liberal groups that join together on campuses predominantly, but all over the world, would not allow Jews who champion their causes, by the way, all through history.
Right.
I mean, Jews are, if not the single greatest champion of rights, human rights, across all different groups.
Correct.
And I don't know who is. I mean, rabbis marched arm in arm with Martin Luther King.
Right.
Jews have championed women's rights. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did more for women's rights than anyone realizes.
Right.
And her people with the ADL and a lot of groups that were created. The ACLU was founded, and all of the people who worked in that organization.
What's the ACLU?
The American Civil Liberties.
Remember, I'm still Canadian.
I apologize. I apologize, and for the audience.
No. So I know all the other organizations. The ACLU. I've heard it. I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
I don't know what it stands
So,
for.
I mean, it's a group basically that when someone's civil rights and civil liberties are threatened in any way, that's the group that hires an attorney and goes into court and takes your case all the way to the Supreme Court if it needs be, and argues on your behalf or your group's behalf that you've been wronged. And it's a very important.
And it's a group championed by Jews for everybody.
Forever. I mean, basically founded and championed by Jews.
Amazing. I didn't know that. I mean, I'm not surprised. I mean, I can see what happens within Israel alone, right? But
yeah, and it's to our detriment. Jews have too big a heart. We even challenge each other. Okay, we argue.
Israel
with
was
each
almost
other.
torn in half.
Right, and we can't even elect a government in our own democracy because we all want to
democratic.
help people. We all have different causes and different thoughts, and it's really hard. And I get it, but
I don't think people realize, and I have to make this point, that there are Muslim Arab leaders in the Knesset openly saying for the destruction of Israel, allowed to have voices
Correct.
for their people in the government. Like, where do you hear anything like that? Where do you see anything like that?
I see it a little bit with Rashida.
Well, that was
Tlaib.
really nice. The lady just walked by and gave me a nod for the Israeli flag. Usually I
Nice.
get a completely different stare. And if you notice, I'm constantly scanning and looking around
course.
behind me, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of talk about people possibly removing mezuzahs from their homes.
The
and
speaker I had
flags
on before, the guest I had on before you, his father removed it, and I called him a coward, but I understood his position.
I get it. I mean, do you want to have the big chai wrapped around your
I do, yeah.
neck and wear it outside
I
your
do
shirt?
because
or
I'm a
unbutton it?
lunatic, and I bring that on. Am I right? No. Whatever it is that you have to do to survive and thrive and feel safe within your own skin and feel good, you do that.
I'm not here for right and wrong arguments, okay?
Really?
I'm here. We're so far beyond that. There are millions, if not billions, of people who are openly cheering for a terrorist group
Correct.
who butchered babies, pregnant mothers, who put.
Do you have any proof of that?
I didn't know I was supposed to bring that to this.
No, that's gaslighting, right?
I'm kidding.
Just trying to step away. And that's the thing that I think there's a phase that, and this war usually didn't expect for it to go this long. I think we've now entered new uncharted waters and territories on every single front where Israel has made a very powerful statement and said, we are not asking for permission.
And we shouldn't.
Absolutely, we shouldn't.
I mean, it's about time, and I don't know why it's taken as long as it has, because probably could have nipped at least Hamas in the bud back in 2007. But, you live and you learn, I suppose. And, Israel did pull out completely 100% on faith in 2005 with the hope of doing so would lead to some sort of peace and agreement with the Palestinian people. And instead of that happening, the Palestinian people instead went the complete other way, elected Hamas and
elected 20-year to 4-year term.
Correct. So back to what we were talking about, campuses today, which is as disturbing as anything. I mean, I have to send my kids to these schools.
Are you going to?
So let's get into that. So these groups banded together and excluded only the Jews, who would be amazing advocates on all of their behalf, because of the Palestinian cause. Now, this is an amazing bridge, okay? Every single one of these groups, if not the crux and the most stringent argument of what these groups are founded on, the opposite is true with Hamas. Okay, like I can't name a group that would be accepted under the regime of Hamas if they went and lived in Gaza or the West Bank right now. Like I can't think of one of these campus groups who would have any freedoms, who would probably not be murdered right in the street for their views or for their actions. And they have decided to align themselves with who they view as being oppressed, the Palestinian people. And they're right. The Palestinian people are, in fact, being oppressed. But they're not being oppressed by Jews or by Israel. And that is what the world does not understand.
No, I'll have to stop you there.
Maybe they do.
I think they I know they understand. They have to understand. You can't judge the social media.
But if you have smart enough people who have done their research, and I'm not, I do your air quotes again, they'll throw back in your face, the West Bank doesn't have Hamas.
Right.
So then we have to have a whole nother conversation.
How does that correlate?
Well, it does. They're Palestinian people too.
Right. So we're talking.
So now we're talking about ridding them of Palestinians. I get into circular arguments is all I'm saying. Okay. Most people aren't informed. They don't realize that there's two separate things happening and that one has Hamas and one doesn't. And look, you find out quickly who you're talking to and how much research, and again, I'm doing air quotes, they've done in 5 seconds having this conversation. But there are some very well-educated people that do know some of the nuances and some of the history of the region. Some even know a bunch, but they still don't understand why Israel does, to some extent, occupy the West Bank and some of those areas. Well, it has a military presence.
Where in the West Bank are they occupied? What are you talking about?
They're not occupied.
There isn't a Jew living in the West Bank. There isn't a Jew living in Gaza.
Okay.
We're talking about, are we considering Jerusalem?
Are we talking about the settlements?
What settlements?
They don't exist?
No. You see, this is the problem that we get into, and we get into them quite often. Because then, in theory, Jerusalem is a settlement, right?
No. It's separate. Now, we can get into the nuances of the settlements and whether I believe that they're justified, and I do. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Ma'ale Adumim, is that a settlement in the West Bank?
No.
Okay. Depends whose definition you talk to, right?
Okay. I mean, we can get into the whole Hebron and Judea. I mean, think about those words. Those regions are still, to this day, called Hebron and Judea. Okay?
Okay.
And they're disputed territories somehow.
By whom? Who's disputing?
Exactly.
So, okay, I have to go back to the original point of this conversation about you're saying people being informed but still don't understand what Israel is doing. What I will tell you is I think that, again, there's no way to qualify any of this stuff. This is just a conversation that we're having between two people that ultimately just want to live in peace, and that's factual. I can gaslight and say Jews are baby killers and all this shit because it's fucking garbage. It's true and not true. Everybody knows this. It's indisputable. But that's what they'll say because that's what the abused always say about the other person. You made me do it, so I'm retaliating. But the way what happened in Makhachkala and Derbent was not necessarily just about Jews. In fact, I would say that it was only maybe 1% about Jews stating a statement that, we will hunt you down wherever you are. It was a statement to the rest of the world saying that if you side with Israel, if you have an opinion other than what we believe in, this will be your fate.
It already
around
is.
the world. So I think a lot of people, overwhelming majority of people, understand, realize, recognize, even empathize with Israel, but won't say a fucking word because they don't have a horse in this race. They don't have a dog in the fight. They don't care about, anything but the safety of their children, which is exactly what needs to happen. But they see what kind of venom that they're going to have to encounter if they speak up and stand out.
Didn't that happen in Europe in the 30s?
It's exactly what happened.
And most people stayed silent.
Right. And they are just as complicit.
I understand. And I get it. And I understand. Look, there are Palestinian innocent people that truly are innocent. And if Hamas went away, they would go about their business. They may, in their minds, still harbor hate for the Jews and Israel, but they keep their head down. They do their job. They'd raise their children and never do anything. Okay? And yes, they have to support Hamas because maybe Hamas has a gun to their head or it has their claws in their children and, has their hooks in them as the future generation of terrorists, and there's nothing they can do about it. Well, it's like gangs in Chicago or Los Angeles where this is happening to people's children, and so they tolerate the gangs on their turf because they don't want to get shot.
Well, I'll take it even further. It's not where it differs completely from a gang is that they are incentivized monetarily to participate in these heinous acts.
Well, aren't the kids who have a job when they're 8 years old selling dime bags on the corner incentivized? They make more money as an 8 or 10-year-old doing that than they probably will their entire life.
Yes, but the difference is selling a dime bag and taking up a Kalashnikov and try to slaughter people are two different animals. It's leaps and bounds between what one impact has versus the other.
Well,
taking human life.
You can argue that that's the truth, but when you're 8, you're probably not doing that in Palestine, and you're probably not doing that on the corner in Chicago or LA. But by the time you're 15 and you have, an
only option
AR-15 in your hands, you might be doing a drive-by that catches some innocent people in its path while you're doing it.
Right. But the thing is that the gang members had a chance and an opportunity to pick a plethora of other jobs, including working in McDonald's, whereas in Gaza, the only way for you to actually earn a living is to become a serial murderer.
It's horrible. I mean, these people are on yachts.
And yet the Jews are the ones that have created that problem.
Well, I mean, look, both countries received their divided land in 1947/48, and one people decided to build buildings and businesses and farm the land. By the way, this was all desert.
Right.
Have you seen pictures of Tel Aviv? Tel Aviv in the early 1900s was a desert oasis, just like Gaza, along the Mediterranean with nothing.
Right.
There was sand. It was a desert. So was much of what we now call Israel. And they have gone to great lengths to tame the beast that is that desert wasteland, to grow industries, to focus on education, whilst the other people who have grown, by the way, in terms of population at a much faster clip and who have run every opportunity into the ground. All they do is they have leadership who siphons off the billions in aid that they receive from the world, billions, every year for their own good. They're leaders of Hamas, for instance. And by the way, Hamas is just the most recent iteration of corrupt leadership who has run the Palestinian people in some way. But the three most recent leaders of Hamas are all richer than Oprah and Taylor Swift. They have billions and billions of dollars that they've siphoned off and made themselves rich, and they do not live in Gaza. Of course not. They live in Qatar, or they live in the south of France, or in London in their lavish multi-million-dollar apartments or $50 million yachts. They live the life of luxury, and they get on the phone, on their sat phone or whatever it is, to their underlings and tell them, what you need to do today is you need to make sure that you attack Israel along the fence in Gaza, and you need to keep the rockets flowing towards civilized areas.
Do you think that there are people within Gaza that are silently saying and resent the leadership for exactly that? They are struggling, they are scraping by, they are making it day to day, and the leadership is living a billionaire's lifestyle on the backs and blood of their children. Do you think that conversation is real within Gaza? Or
I think there are people that think that. I do think that there are legitimately good people who haven't fully been swayed by the Kool-Aid they've been fed since a young age of hate, and that truly believe that there could be peace and truly believe that they are in a miserable life because of their own poor governance. I do believe that there are people that believe that. And
do you think that there's enough of them to initiate change within?
We're going to have to see. We spoke about this last time. I'm not as optimistic about that as you are, because I think it's going to take generations to undo what has been done, if it even can be. I also think that we're vastly different people. Jews are different in terms of what's important to them than the entire Arabic world, but certainly than the Palestinians. And so, to dig out of this, you need to hit the books, and it can't be books that have been doctored to indoctrinate hate. It needs to be actual books where the people can learn something of value and contribute to the world.
What do you think happens 30 days from now? Where do you think what position are we going to be in as Jews in diaspora and in Israel?
Horrified that the world still doesn't understand, that there's too many still silent, or so many that will only capitulate with a couple different words condemning maybe October 7th and nothing else. That I don't know if there will have been a ceasefire by then. The pressure will ratchet up from people like Kamala Harris and Biden, and certainly from people in other countries in the Western world that Israel values, for them to do a ceasefire. But the ceasefire does only benefit Hamas. I know it's going to get worse and worse. Humanitarian situation is grave. I still don't understand why it's all on Israel. I still don't understand why none of the Arab countries. I mean, I do understand. I don't understand why.
Is it? Give me your understanding of why.
Why the Arab world won't take in refugees from Palestine? Because then their long game goes away. I mean, the long game is to have this thorn in the side of Israel for forever, or until they can get that land back and have an Arab dominant society throughout the Middle East, and no Jewish land in the midst of that. Until that's done, they want their little chip there to irritate, and they'll do everything they can. It's obvious to keep it that way, and they'll argue on the basis of it's great. I already see the arguments coming out. If you like read the tea leaves in between the lines, you'll see that no, there's no way that we will let the Palestinians leave, because once they leave, then the Zionists will take that land too and continue their land grab, and then there will be nowhere for the Palestinians to have a state. And that's the narrative that they want the world to think, because they already want the world to think that Israel's all about grabbing land and nothing else. and that's so far from the truth. It's painful. All Israel wants is peace. It's all they've ever wanted since before 1947. I mean, since there was a Zionist movement in the 1800s, that's what Jews have wanted. And frankly, if you look through the Midrash and through all of the Jewish writings, through history, even, that's all Jews have wanted since the Romans banished them from that land.
I would have to add to that. I think I agree the thorn and the chip, but I also think that they are afraid to import terrorism, and they understand the quality of people that would be crossing over the border, and it would be not unlike what the rest of specifically Western Europe is now encountering from within its midst. They're dealing with the same sort of situation. I mean, you saw 100,000 plus people marching into the UK, and
a lot of the Palestinian people, and I'm using quotes again, a lot of the Palestinian people were cast-offs from these Arab populations. There weren't even borders when some of them were cast off.
Sure. And this is something they dispute because they just want to calculate history from a point in time that is arbitrary. But yes, it's exactly right. They are just a mishmash of Jordanian, Lebanese, Egyptian.
Yeah.
Yasser Arafat was born in Egypt.
I mean, Gaza was Egyptian. Through
Correct.
67. I mean,
and the West Bank was Jordanian.
Correct. And so, these people, and by the way, the king of Jordan does not want any of these people, and he's made that clear, including the previous king made it even clearer. Fact. And so
facts.
Yeah, I mean, they want nothing to do with these people, which is it's very telling to the world. But
when you talk to people about that, it's just like, oh, it's a red herring. One of the most despicable podcasts I ever heard was one by Lex Friedman, who his silence is deafening, but he had a gentleman on, I forget his name. He's a very pro-Palestinian, lying sack of you-know-what. And the only question when he was going on about Sheikh Jarrah and all this land claims and stuff like that, absolutely fabricated, false, and from a point of history that is a sliver of the actual chain of events. And the only thing Lex Friedman, whose grandfather, according to him, I think, fought the Nazis, asked him, well, what do you say for Jews that claim historically and biblically that Israel is their land? And this guy got away with saying, well, that's just a red herring, and glanced it off and kept going.
It's a red herring.
Right. It's a red herring. Just think about how you took 3,500 years worth of history and just said, yeah, I don't agree with that statement. And let's move on to real history, 1948, the Nakba.
Right. The Nakba. The Nakba was catastrophic to them in their own minds. I think it was. But, here we are.
I will tell you that I'm from our last podcast, which this will come in succession. You talked about something, and we only have a few minutes left, about arming yourself and protecting yourself and stuff like that. I will tell you that as Israel becomes more successful, as this goes on, because this is uncharted waters for what the expectations of a normal war would be. It's now time is actually playing into Israel's hands, except for the hostages. And as Israel becomes more successful, the war will come to our doorsteps because they will start to harass Jews worldwide, and the amount of pressure that will be applied worldwide to quash these people. And it's not going to be to stop Israel. It's just to quiet within their own borders is what's coming next. So we need to be prepared, protect yourself, arm yourself, and be ready for it.
Well, it's terrifying, and I'm devastated as a human being that I live in a world that I need to have these thoughts. I need to have these conversations. I don't remember when it was, but it was probably in the 90s after the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles when I first heard a black celebrity on like a talk show talk about the talk that black parents must have with their children about how to act if they ever get pulled over by the police or if they ever interact with police on the streets or anywhere. And, they're doing it for their own safety, and they don't understand that racism is pervasive, even in the police department. And it hit me really hard, and it hit me even harder when I had kids, knowing that I have to have
The talk
that Jews have to have with their kids. And I'm having it slowly and in a lot of different ways as they get older. But it's devastating as a parent to have to explain to your kids that there are large swaths of society that hate you and want you dead and will do a lot of horrible things to people you love, to Israel, to other Jews. And in the name of Jew hatred, in the name of Israel, and that it's all cloaked anti-Semitism, you're going to see hate crimes. Well,
here's what I'm going to do. I want to leave this off because what I'm going to do is I want a couple of months from now to have you back on, because we have great discourse, and to see where we're at that time. All right. Thanks for coming on, Todd.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun to get some of this off my chest.
My
I
pleasure.
love meeting you, and I wish you nothing but success.
Amen. We'll do this again.